if there are any questions.
Oh no.
Oh, Tristan, I have it up if you want.
Yeah, I know. I just want to have it myself, and I got it here. So we're good.
I just
No
opened
problem.
the thing. We're going live. This was all right. It's happening.
Cool.
But in good news, it says it's not there. Can you share your computer audio?
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to welcome you to this live stream for the album release of Tristan Perich's Drift Multiply. I'm here with the composer, Tristan Perich, and the conductor, Doug Perkins. We're all streaming in from our various undisclosed locations around the country, but really, really happy to see a bunch of friendly names, if not faces, in the chat. We'll be talking for about 45 minutes together about the kind of history of the piece and some of how this all came to be. But feel free, if you're watching, to include include questions in the chat as we're talking live. And we'll be keeping an eye on that throughout to answer your questions. So why don't we start with Tristan? I heard that this is a project that you've actually been thinking about for a long, long time, not just when the project and the commission came about. How long has this been something that you've been kind of thinking about as a project?
Yeah, well, thanks, Anne. Hi, everybody. Good evening. So, yeah, this is one of those projects that started out as just a vague glimmer of an idea, and then took a very long time to sort of like, come into reality. And in hindsight, I think I'm very lucky that it took a long time. I think the idea dated back to sort of around 2009 or so, when I was, only a couple years into writing music for acoustic instruments with electronics, the one-bit electronics that I've been working with. And I think that it was the big project, right? It was like the sort of the path was clear to this piece for 50 violins and 50 speakers from early on. And I had pitched the idea to Issue Project Room, and they, eventually came through with the commission, which took some time to get together. And then it sort of just sat in my mind for many years until Red Bull Music Festival came along. Adam Shore is the curator there, who was kind of, wanted to, I guess, make it happen, because it's a hard piece to put on for 50 musicians, and which are all, individually sourced. It's not like you can just go to a group, 50 violin group, and do this piece. So it was Red Bull who really kind of made it happen, and that's when I wrote the music. And so it was, 8 or 9, 10, somewhere around there, years between the first idea and writing the music. And in the meantime, I had done so much else with, one-bit music. I think that I hadn't even necessarily written one-bit symphony at the time when I first had this idea. So I think I'm grateful in a weird way that it didn't happen when I originally wanted it to happen, because it allowed those ideas to really develop in the meantime and settle into whatever it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I just love the way that you talk about since you mentioned One Bit Symphony, some of the ways that you talk about working with that and relating to a score. I think that the first time I met you was actually because I heard you talking about your music, and was like, oh, this is so cool that this is the way that this guy thinks about electronics, and just reached out to you. But I know that you had kind of musical training on both sides, but was that a natural combination that you thought was always there in your mind, or was it something that you had kind of separately thought of these things and drew the metaphor, but not necessarily thought that they would go together when you had started working with one-bit electronics?
Yeah, well, before that, I was really against this combination. I was sort of like interested in writing classical music, whatever that means, with kind of acoustic instrumentation, and staying away from electroacoustic music. It didn't have the kind of like the grit or the tangible quality of the acoustic instruments, and that was, to me, the essence of live sound. Was like the musician pressing a key on a piano and having it hit the string, and that resonates and that creates sound, and you're partaking in the creation of that sound, and then the musician turns it into music, right? Whatever that means too. But I was learning to work with electronics in college, and it's just at some point I realized that was the physical connection that I needed was when I worked with was when I began working with an actual circuit board and connecting a speaker to a microchip to create this like direct connection between the code running on the chip and the speaker. And for the first time, for me at least, that was electronic sound that had some sort of tangible physical reality, that the 1-bit on and off, ones and zeros, binary information were these actual electric voltage potentials, which when you output them from the chip and you send those voltage potentials to a speaker, and I've got a bunch of speakers here, and the electromagnet of the speaker is activated and it pulls it back, and then you set it to a 0 and it pushes it out, and it pulls, it creates an oscillation that way that now you have sound, electronic sound, but it's sort of like tied to this physical process the way that the acoustic instrumentation always was. And so then it was just a series of kind of like, in a way, obvious connections, right? Like of exploring that in different ways with instruments that have a sustain, like string instruments or wind instruments, or things like percussion or piano that typically have an attack and a decay, and thinking about the nature of those mechanisms of sound making and what they mean in the context of this 1-bit sound, because 1-bit sound is very, very primitive. It's just single volume, single amplitude, rather, let's call it single amplitude, on and off binary waveform. And so the way I use it, which is just fixed frequency, or in the case of these noise sections that we'll probably talk about, just fixed probabilistic noise, there's a very, very specific character and an identity to that sound. And it kind of opened up all these possibilities of how to combine that with other instrumentation. And that's been the exploration since then, basically. Sorry if these answers are long-winded. You cut me off.
No, this is great. I mean, this is the whole idea, and it's great to hear your process through all of this and kind of how the thing evolved, because I think for something that's of this scale and conceptually, I was actually really interested in the fact that it had kind of been sitting with you for such a long time. And just to kind of bring Doug in for a minute, Doug, how long have you been involved in the process? Because I know you were involved, you've been involved for a while now and done the piece several times, but what was the connection that brought the two of you together and getting you involved in being the conductor for this piece?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've been involved at some level for a long time. Tristan and I go back many, many years. First, we were neighbors, but we weren't really friends yet. When I lived on 23rd Street and he lived on 24th Street, and Baruch College separated us. And struck up a relationship through his percussion music that he was speaking of. I played his crotale duo a ton of times. Through my duo with Todd Meehan and with Tristan, we played his chime duo a number of times. I guess I met Tristan and I became friends, at least, the evening of his premiere of his toy piano trio. And then I think, through working together, and then Todd and I asked him to write these parallels, which was for triangles and hi-hats for like a big 45-minute monster work. And I think maybe during that project, Tristan would be talking about this big idea he had. And it was at the same time that I was doing some large scale projects doing things like a Nonesuch with John Luther Adams. And, I was doing a number of very large projects. So I think Tristan, my feeling a little bit was that you thought of this piece as something that was in your brain, but might not happen. And then after enough drinks, I was the one who would start to say like, well, I think I can see how we could make this work if we got violinists from here and we called these people. I think I probably was the one who was instigating and yes-anding the project enough until finally, because in a lot of ways, and we can talk about this in a while, I think every part of the project seemed improbable, getting this many violinists interested in doing this project and this that many speakers and that many cables. So whether it was getting somebody who was brave enough to present it, and or even these workshops like we did in Boston, how could we get enough violinists in the room to see if it worked? Kind of, I think I got in there by, I think at some point my role of conductor in this piece or producer of the record was, I can solve problems, and I am patient and able to deal with what might cause other musicians to run away screaming. That's sort of when I get happy. So
maybe I'll jump in also and say that Doug and I, through performance, when he was, not when he was a percussionist, he still is, but when we were working together more that way, like, Doug, you've always been like a project kind of person. Like you're interested in projects, and I'm interested in projects. And I think we always kind of got off in talking about those kinds of ideas, like the times we've done Impermanent, my Tubular Bells piece, like just brainstorming like how to push that into new spaces and new. It's just like we've got along well thinking about things that way. It's like the spirit of adventure or something together, and yeah, that you had done this John Luther Adams work. It just seemed like this was the perfect project to do together, and just dive in and see what happens. And thanks to Red Bull, that happened.
I think kind of touching on something else you were saying, I wonder if now might be a good time to share just some of the audio alone, because I think some of that is just as you were both talking about, kind of having a community of practice or a community of people that can kind of get you excited about hearing and conceptualizing this thing, and then following through in a way that will follow through to get that sound that you want before all of the logistics of getting the people together have been worked out. Or I feel like that's the heart of a lot of your great projects, is the sound concept is really clear. And I was wondering if we could listen to a little bit more of the audio excerpts, if you want to talk through some things over, or just kind of have us listen a little bit before we go into more of the details.
Sure, maybe we'll listen for a second. I actually might start though with one of the excerpts that has some video. Cool. Because the next excerpt would have it would end in white noise, and that's something maybe we could kind of talk about down the line. So here is, let me just select the right screen share video. So this is just an excerpt from the Red Bull show. Sorry, they all have the same names, so it's hard to know what's what.
It's the one that's drift, multiply, final in all caps, right? That's the naming system.
V14 something. Here we go. Let's see if this works.
I forgot how many friends were in that band. It's such a fun band of people.
Yeah.
It really was. There's a few secret violists in that band, I have to say.
That's a tradition that dates back to my 10 violin piece too. There are always,
Nice.
always some.
Yeah. Seeing that reminded me of one thing, talking about a little bit of what we were talking about before this, remembering, well, talking about Tristan, the departure that it took for you to go from instruments with fixed pitch and onsets and decays to a land of violins are nothing if not flexible and complex. And so it was, I remember so distinctly that first hour when we were at the Boston Conservatory working on this, really trying to like figure out what the heck the sound world is, as we were talking about, how does one communicate the language of, or translate the language of 1-bit music into violin, and how does a string player make an attack, or how does one tune to it, because the tuning is so fixed. I learned so much in Rotterdam about what a C can sound like and how we tune C's on the violin, for example, of one of many things. But just really like, I remember kind of like we worked for about an hour and then had a break, and you and I just kind of like epiphany. And then by the end, like sort of figured out a vocabulary to move forward. And then we ate a lot of pizza and then did it in New York, I think.
Yeah, it's true. One of the main identities, like the main characteristics of the sound, is that it's a fixed duration. It's on until it's off. And that's kind of one of the core techniques in this piece is for string players to play immediate constant volume and ending. And so it becomes, it's kind of a little bit more like the organ or something, right? One of these instruments where the attack and the cutoff are important element of the composition, that there's a rhythmic grid for that, and that to have the violins fit into the rhythmic grid of the electronics by nature of the sort of vocabulary of the electronics is it is a different language, right?
It's so interesting to me because it's at the same time, even though for those who don't know, I'm a string player, so I know what a violin sounds like, but at the same time, it almost sounds like there's just this shimmer, and it's as though, because there are so many voices with the 1-bit electronics, it's almost like that light you get on the ocean when it's really close to the horizon, and there's the waves are going through, and then some of the sides of the waves are lit and some are shadow. And so as you're getting them moving around, you get as a composite this shimmer, and it moves around as the waves are in the light or in shadow. But that it's just such a strong image to me that it's the shimmering really fits in with the violin sound. And especially when you have 50 violins playing together, it's some of that, the quality of a section sound you get is the little microtonal out of tune that you naturally get, especially with a length of this duration when you have to, your instrument is adjusting. And so it feels like then in these sections that are pitch related, that the electronics just give this really gorgeous shimmer to everything. And yeah, I don't mind to use clear imagery with that, but
no, I love that actually, and I love the times that working with this sort of very primitive electronic waveform reminds me of things from the natural world, and this happens a lot during the noise sections. That something that's purely electronic, completely otherworldly, that's not attached to any of our real world experience until microchips were developed, essentially, that can still remind us of these physical phenomena. And I like that sunset on the water one, because it is a sort of a binary effect. When you have a sunset, you have a rather constantly lit background sky, and then the water is either catching that or not. So you have these hard edges that really do kind of have this binary effect that I like, at least when things get really kind of pointillistic or something. And I was going to say about the kind of shimmering quality also, so one bit sound it's essentially square waves, right? And square waves have an infinite harmonic series. It has very, very rich overtones, basically. And those rich overtones, I don't know, I guess I find that they blend well with a lot of different kinds of instrumentation, right? And that the violins have a kind of very bright, rich overtone series as well. And so they kind of just get to dance, with each other. And that in combination, more and more and more voices, that it just creates this very, very dense picture. And it's funny, I was just streaming the album on Spotify earlier today or something, and realizing, and I'm sure everybody says this, right? Like streaming services, like my music doesn't sound as good on on the low quality streaming services, but like it maybe it takes us listening to our own music to realize what audio compression does to our waveforms, and that I hope you guys get a chance to listen to, the original high def audio. Not that anybody has CD players or anything these days, but because it just reminds me of all of that richness that is so kind of just exciting. It's orally exciting. It's it excites our nerves, our neurons.
It was very special to be at the premiere. I'm so grateful that I was able to be there and hear that in St. John the Divine, and not, I mean, it must be different though. Doug, it's probably more for you, like being one of the players in the middle of it, because you have kind of the best seat in the house, being right in the middle of the sound. Is it strange for you to hear it outside of that, or does it still feel like it has the same energy to you?
I think it feels like it has the same energy. We definitely spent a long time, a comically long amount of time mixing this record to really try to get it right. Because again, like all these things that you're talking about, and coming back to that richness of string players, and I could, and probably will keep talking about what it is to work with, to get that string sound, and to get in this piece. You have this electronics that are so fixed, and then 50 string players who have 50 different voices in the piece. It's not like they're playing as one unified orchestra section. So it's 50 soloists, and it has a great power, as you say, to bring in wave analogies. When there are moments in the piece where we go from one voice being played to 50 people crescendoing into the same gesture, you can really feel that in a powerful way on stage. And interestingly, so the problem on stage is convincing player number 50, who is way back there, that their voice is as important as player one, and that they should play with the same sense of chamber music and sense of being a soloist, even though their stand partner is a binary speaker turning on and off, pushing air. That in the process of making the record, spending a long time trying to figure out how to bring the organicism to this moment, to this to the recorded medium. And it took thanks to Tristan, and thanks to our engineer Pat Burns, and Josh Modney, and Lauren Colley, and Yvonne Lamb, who we all definitely harangued for hours and hours as we tried to get it right. But I really think there was a day, I remember, there were two big days. One, when we were in Rotterdam, and we did this piece with dance. And so we were working and rehearsing in a place where circus performers trained. So interestingly, we're like where there would be like foam pits and things, but there was this balcony above. And I remember standing up there with Tristan when we were, well done, Tristan.
Nice.
Where you could hear the piece up there, the piece sort of came alive, and you could hear the best of the violins and the best of the strings. And so there was a day somewhere in the mix, version number 65.2, final, that I remember Tristan saying, like, it sounds like the balcony. And so I remember but it took us a while. It took us quite a while, I think, to get back to that sound. But then once we found it, it was kind of, we knew it was right, I think.
Yeah, I think Doug has the best seat in the house for sure when he's conducting, and you're really in the sound. And I guess the only problem is that you're biased towards the front players. But with the recording, it was a chance to represent the piece as it's really meant to be experienced, which is kind of like weirdly at a distance, right? Because if you're close to the piece, then you're close to one part of the piece. And it was, in my mind, the piece is always supposed to kind of exist as this sort of sculptural object in a space. And that you're kind of getting the cumulative effect of all of these things happening within that space. But really, it sounds best, from above in some way, in some kind of like form. I guess I can't even really say that though, because it's all just different perspectives and different facets of the kind of collective picture. But the recording ultimately does bring you into the piece, and that's really satisfying experience for me, because you get the crispness of the 1-bit sound and the crispness of the strings and the full dimension of the piece, which is kind of, it was different with this piece. I was really thinking about space more with Drift Multiply than I had been in my other works. It was always meant to be a piece with dimension in 2 dimensions. It's like the musicians are arranged in a square with the speakers, and the music plays with motion in all of these different axes. So yeah.
Neat. I guess that kind of connects to a question that we have now from the chat. Emily asks, Doug, what was it like going from being a percussionist who's used to being a part of the ensemble to now leading the ensemble as a conductor? So kind of related to this sound question, but also just in terms of what it means to kind of be leading and almost playing the ensemble, or how do you think about that?
It's a great question. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like for me, first, like anytime I conduct, it's kind of an extension of chamber music, and just kind of facilitating. I always think of, first I think that, and then my role as a conductor is, I think of it at best is when we're playing chamber music, but sometimes we need conductors when there's not enough time and somebody just needs to be up there making choices quickly. So I think that tends to be my mindset. I think the biggest thing going from a percussionist, I must admit that I'm terrified to be in. It's an act of bravery to step in front of that many string players as a percussionist. I just, for whatever it's worth, as a leader, I bring with the skills I have. So like in this case, I really know a lot about Tristan's music, and I know about how to work with the electronics and voice things. So when I realized I could work to my strengths, that was very good. And then I think also good leadership on my part to know when Josh Modney, who a lot of people in New York know as a big person in the new music scene, was there. And so I was very confident in turning to Josh sometimes and saying, how would you do this, Josh? And then one of my favorite moments, I really enjoyed working with these ensembles, but there was a moment where we had to tune something, and as my ears are not as good as your ears are for tuning things, for sure. And I started to try to give a subject on the tuning, and like I was saying like, I think that's sharp, and then 49 people were like, but I was just so happy as a leader that they felt comfortable enough to tell me that, and we fixed it. We fixed it together. So I quite enjoy that, and I also was a summer camp director as a kid, so I think bringing groups together for fun projects, I'm good at that, and sometimes we have to wave our hands as a conductor.
And I think making people comfortable and the sense of community, that there's a lot of that's important that people don't talk about in conducting, like you were saying, and just knowing from a performer side and having humility about the things that you're inviting them to be a part of instead of telling them to do, is also comes out really clearly. What were you going to say, Tristan?
Well, I was just going to say that those are skills that Doug excels in. I think that the way you make musicians feel comfortable is very unique, Doug. And I should say also that the piece, I mean, the role of the conductor is kind of funny in this piece, because I think that Doug's primary role is really just being the ears of the group, the person who's shaping the piece, right? Like what you said, Doug, like, my music, kind of how it's supposed to work, how it's supposed to sound. And you're really sort of just guiding the musicians into this collective voice in achieving that. And the timekeeping, it's funny because you were doing timekeeping. We also had these displays that the musicians were reading bar numbers off of, and we also had some click tracks. And so there was all this kind of redundancy on that. But what's more interesting to me in Doug's role is finding that hairline balance of the strings living with the electronics, where you're really not seeing a piece just with string players accompanied by electronics or electronics accompanied by string players, but they're really supposed to live in the same world. And that is difficult to really nail, especially in a piece that's very long and where the volume changes of the piece and the electronics have a fixed amplitude, and so that has to work. And so there was a lot of kind of trial error in the early days of workshopping this piece that sort of coalesced into the final version. Yeah, I keep starting these sentences and then ending them.
No, it's go ahead, Doug.
Oh, just well, and as you know, as a string player, I think sometimes as a conductor, if one were to watch a conductor conduct, a Beethoven symphony, sometimes the back of the string section might not be looking as much as the conductor wanted. And so much of it is just trying to get the ensemble to breathe together or to live together. So I do feel like in that same way, so much of my role was to keep people engaged and to let, Violin 39 know that I knew that they had to make their solo entrance on the end of 3 and measure 1,205, that was an important note and that I still cared about them. And so it was just a lot of checking in so that people remained engaged so that we could be working as a collective, because it could, as Tristan said, everyone could just kind of turn into that for an hour, and that's no fun. So,
well, and it's interesting because the people that you got, at least for the New York performance, or even everybody, even Violin 49 is somebody who probably on some other gig is playing concertmaster at Carnegie Hall, or just did a show at Issue Project Room where they were soloing. There were all these really cool group of people from all over things. That was kind of fun because actually I experienced this even more as a violist, but some of the people that you love playing with the most, you never get to play on gigs with, because usually you're the one person who's there, and so to actually be able to have all those great players together for this one thing was really cool to see. And I think there's the possibility of getting that energy out and kind of encouraging people. Whereas in a normal kind of orchestral ensemble, that's discouraged so much that it's so much more of an effort to encourage people to come back to that. I guess, go ahead.
The party vibes real in that regard in New York, for sure. On break, everyone's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this."
Yeah.
I'll share a completely. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Completely random aside. In math, there's this. I don't remember what it's called exactly, but it's like an enumeration of the numbers where you're trying to find a number that's not special, and so the number 1 is special because it's the first number, and maybe the number 3 is special because it's the first prime that's not 2, and the number whatever you can think of, like, the first Fibonacci, like all these different, numbers have these special qualities, and you're like, okay, what's not interesting about this number? And then it turns out that number is the first number that you would call uninteresting. And so that makes it interesting. And it kind of makes you realize that every element in a set has a certain role. And that's really true in this piece, that player number 50, that's an incredibly meaningful position in the ensemble. In this case, it's the back right, but that's like the opposing corner to number 1. And so in a weird way, it's like players 1 and 50 are maybe the most important, or 1, 5, 46, and 50. And then you kind of start to see then all the relationships that build off of those. And it was really challenging. I tried to write this piece in such a way that there were like players that had, bigger roles maybe or something, but it was like, that would be like concert master roles or something, and it's really resisted that because of this sort of flatness. It was like there wasn't any particular player that had that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that kind of leads into Neil's question, was I was going to ask.
Hi, Neil.
Neil asks, what were the challenges of recording as opposed to performing this piece? And I'd like to ask, how did you record it? Did you end up recording, just Josh Modney playing all the parts and by himself, or did you play everybody with all the electronics at the same time, like a performance, or kind of? How did you record it? And then, as Neil asks, what were the challenges?
Doug, you wanna?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, I think we should first make a little moment for the Neil Wallace Love Show. Who, the asker of the question, the recording would not have happened were it not for his great work and belief in us and Tristan and the piece. Neil is a great presenter from the Netherlands and came to the premiere, and then made this piece and the commission with Lucinda happen and helped make the recording happen. So for years and years, I will be supplying Neil with all the gin and tonics he ever needs. So thank you, Neil. And how we recorded it, I mean, the challenge was just that when we premiered it, and to get this many people in a room to do a thing takes a lot of organization and time and money and craziness. So I think finding the time to do it was the hardest. Luckily, there was an engineer who we worked with. We did 4, 5 performances in the Netherlands over about a week. And so we worked with an engineer, Han de Jong, who was at all the performances, and we recorded every rehearsal and every run through. And then luckily we did the dance performances in an old submarine factory, which was wonderful and crazy. And then we then were lucky to do, after we did the dance performances, we did a concert version of the piece at the Doelen in Rotterdam, poster of which is behind me. And so we were able, there is the submarine factory. And so we were lucky enough that on the day of the concert performance in the Doelen, we had performed the piece 4 times at that point or something. And so we had an afternoon of recording and then the performance. So I think the biggest challenge was time, time to get it done. And again, luckily Han was a real pro and got things done very efficiently for us. So we basically, what you hear on the record is that Doelen recording, and then from the Doelen performance, and then a little bit, Tristan, I think in Tristan's apartment, he recorded his speakers a few times and his circuit board, and Josh and Lauren and Yvonne definitely helped us out when we had a couple of problems. Luckily, we did a little quarantine distance touch up overdubs here and there. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge was just like getting the people in the room to do it and then believing in the process. I think it was the act of making the record felt like, to me, like doing the performances, kind of like, oh my God, if we were going to do this right, we need a week, we need to rent some fancy concert hall for a week, and we need all of the money, but that wasn't going to happen. So we had a day in the Doolin, and we had a great ensemble. And luckily, I think Tristan and I believed in it, and Neil believed in it. And so I think a lot of people, it was a big leap of faith. And luckily the Doolin sounds so great. And we ended up with something really cool.
Yeah, I think thinking about what you were saying before, just about the taking so much time to go through. I worked on another record producing where we had spent a ton of time super detail oriented into a recording. And when, like you were saying, when it was right, it suddenly sounded like how the quartet performed it live. And it was just so interesting because, it was almost the art of kind of getting that vibrancy and balance that you feel live in the recording to line up is such a delicate thing. And I think that perhaps that's a part of why that works so well for you to all just kind of focus and do it in one day and then be able to kind of touch up to get the right energy and everything.
Yeah, it was, to be fair, it was madness. I think in kind of an exciting way. I think definitely Tristan and I, when we closed our eyes and dreamt of it, we definitely dreamt of, being up at MPAC and having all of the days and all of the time.
Yeah.
But this, as a musician, also fun, because sometimes you get to do that kind of thing, and in this, you just have to believe. So I think we took a leap of faith a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're just so lucky, right, for so many things to have recorded this huge piece just before the world changed. I mean, Neil Wallace had this idea to not only stage the piece, but then also commission this dance from Lucinda Childs. And then also he said, if we're doing this, we should record it. And so this engineer, Honda Young, had this array of microphones embedded with the instruments. We also did a past recording, just the electronics, so we could work with that. We had all these performances to work with, plus extra material that I could record to complement that sound. And the editing was very interesting to edit something like this remotely, where everything has to be translated in some way, mediated. And that's the world we live in right now, that like we're not in the same room at the same time. And it's interesting how that changes work processes and relationships. And when it all came together, it really was like, aha. And it was just this incredible journey, right, to get to that point. And then that feeling when everything clicks, it's sort of, I guess it's like playing out in slow motion, which, a feeling that you might normally get to in a different span of time is playing out much longer in the editing process remotely. That just feels like the world we live in right now.
Yeah, if I can ask, and you're both welcome to not answer, how has it been working like this? I know that I've had a much harder time being creative for a long time and really had been focusing on other things. Editing, for some reason, felt a little bit easier because it was concrete. But generating new things was really hard for me. And I was curious for the two of you, has that been hard for you, or have you felt really creative having a different amount of space? And maybe I'll ask the other question after that. But yeah, has it been hard for you to create in this time, or how has it been?
Yeah, super hard. Lucky to have projects that need to happen. And so this was one of those. And I did my thing where, like, when, you know, a recording is coming up, this is your final chance to express this piece. And so I kind of had used that opportunity to revise a little bit of the electronics that hadn't, you know, there was some flexibility a little bit with the electronics that went into the live album. But I think I made Doug and Pat's lives very, very stressful with adding that to the mix. But that was the way I was able to be creative, was through something like this that kind of already existed, and that it's very distracting. I feel like I'm just eternally distracted. That's the way I can kind of sum up these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Doug?
I'm well. I just went back and looked. So we met for a day on February. Well, we met February 27th and February 28th.
Wow.
Tristan flew to Chicago, so we spent a day and a morning in the studio as a team. And then I don't have it written down. Then just kind of things sort of began to dissolve. And then I feel like I remember calling you, I think around May, Tristan, and it was one of those weird, uncomfortable feelings. Yeah, like where it just didn't feel like was okay to start working again. Like I knew we had a deadline, and you know, not to go, I'm not going to try to compare it to 9/11 at all, but in some ways, like there was a similar moment in the aftermath of that where we had to start working again. I remember similarly feeling like, is it okay to call somebody about rehearsal? Or, so I remember you weren't there pacing in my basement with me, but I remember pacing around my basement, just like kind of saying like, I'm going to send you some thoughts. I've been listening, and, you know, like, and it kind of felt, distracting and strange. And like, you know, I think for me, so much of it was tied up in like my family sanity, or into this day, like I have a 13-year-old, and like making sure he's okay and as he's keeping it together. So it was at one level a nice distraction, and at another level I was distracted. And then being a part, I want to someday print out, Tristan, our comment log with our poor engineer Pat. It's like well over 100 pages of just
Easily
multicolored comments on comments, comments undone, comments restated. I think to the point where, you know, I mean, it was just so, because also I think had we all been in the room, we could have got this done, I think, fairly quickly, but having to translate it all in this mode.
But who knows, you know, it takes a while for things to settle too, and to figure out what we're actually trying to do. So
so have I, you know, I've appreciated having this project, and I've appreciated, you know, doing it through my teaching, having teaching to do, to get back to a process. So I feel like I'm about to be creative again, maybe. But this one,
that's how I feel too.
Yeah, that's for sure. And also I think it helped me a lot connecting with former students. I only have one private student right now. I'm not teaching all the time anymore, but connecting with former students at the beginning of this felt really like grounding in some way. That was good. But yeah, I guess kind of in that vein, what are the other things that you've been doing non-musically that help you feel grounded right now, for other people that are, or kind of what is making you feel hopeful about starting to feel good about working again?
I think I feel sane when the world around me feels like a rational place. Mm-hmm. And so I have some guarded optimism about there, you know, having less distraction from outside. I think weirdly, one of the things about this time is the amount of ideas I've had that I haven't executed. This is something I didn't say earlier, is that like the execution has been terrible, but the idea list keeps growing. And I've really enjoyed that process as a composer, the times that I've had an idea and couldn't necessarily do the work. It's like when you're on an airplane or something and you just like, you can't do anything and your mind wanders, or maybe you're at a concert or something and your mind wanders and you come up with the big ideas that you might not have otherwise. So that is deeply rewarding. I think I experienced that also when my children were each born, and I wasn't able to do anything, that your mind kind of shifts into a different kind of creative space. And if I was only doing stuff, then I wouldn't have that creative space for the bigger ideas. And I think that actually that would be a big disservice. So I feel lucky for the times that I've had enough mental space to have those kinds of ideas, because otherwise the work doesn't move forward. And it has to, for me, it has to keep moving forward. It has to build. I was going to say something else, but I can't remember now.
Yeah, Doug, if you remember, Tristan, jump in, but Doug, was there anything else you've been doing that has been helping you feel grounded? Either about working or not about working, just generally feeling human and feeling grounded.
Yeah, I've been feeling pretty human lately. Luckily I have a fireplace, so we've been having a lot of fires lately. That's been really, really nice. I have, on a human side also, and a musical side, my family and I have started planning fun trips for a future that we think will be there. So actually we are going to go to Hawaii. We have booked. Where are you from in Hawaii?
I'm from Oahu. I'll tell you all the places to eat. That'll be good.
I've been there a couple times.
Okay.
We can talk. We're going to the Big Island.
Nice.
We went there a couple years ago and just kind of like, the wildness of all of it sort of really captured our imagination. So we booked a flight, a refundable flight to Hawaii that I think has us all like, we think when the world will be okay, we're going to Hawaii. And it's kind of like playing the lottery. We have a thing we can count on, and it's Hawaii. And so we think about that when we get sad, and it gives us a North Star of sorts. And musically, I feel like I have some, some projects with friends next year that we've booked. So I've got holds in my calendar. Like, I feel like concert holds and family vacations, like I see it. And so I feel like those, I'm like, I've got a lifeline to a life that sounds fun and normal, and I'm like gunning for that. And I think hopefully I will practice as a percussionist again soon. Having my students, since I've taken this position at the University of Michigan, and I work with wildly talented students who are somehow managing to play crazy music for me every day. That is inspiring. And if like they've figured out how to do it, I should probably figure out how to do it again. So I've also started to additionally like plan recording sessions, and like I'm trying to like put things back on the calendar that I can manage. And I think even with like, I've appreciated after the record has been done, Tristan and I have had some fun, what have felt like old style Tristan and Doug conversations about like, have you listened to this? Should I write this? Should we do this? And so it feels like it's coming back. It feels crazy, but I've got a really cool gig on the books, and like I've got some stuff in 21, but like June 22, gonna blow it out, and August 21, God willing, I will be in Hawaii.
Nice.
We'll
talk.
Yeah.
Tristan's like, I'm coming too. I didn't tell you.
Well, I'll say something about Hawaii, which I think will bring me back to the piece. And it's one thing I find so interesting. I've been to Hawaii once, is that moving around Hawaii, I can't remember which island it was. You have active lava flowing from active volcanoes, the real molten stuff. And then you have also, tropical jungle kind of climate. And you have everything in between. And it highlights the sort of history of the Earth, at least the sort of biology's impact on Earth, as you have this, molten lava, which is inorganic, as far as I understand. It's rock, it's jagged, and then you drive a couple miles and you kind of see something that's softer, but it's still lava, but it's like softer. It's been broken down a little bit. And then eventually you see dirt. And then eventually you see something growing. And you see kind of like the extreme long-term history of life developing on Earth and breaking down the sort of inorganic Earth and making it into something like dirt and into plant matter and life kind of getting created out of that. And I love it because it's so drastic. You can move between these different extreme climates like in minutes basically, and see how life did that. And I think there's something a little bit like that in how I think about the tone and the noise in Drift Multiply. That this is the first piece of music that I wrote that has the electronics doing both tone and noise, and the strings also playing tone and noise. And for me, tone, fixed frequency pitch is sort of like very, very little information content on a mathematical level. It's sort of like the polar opposite of noise, which is essentially a random signal, which is maximal information content. And at the same time, white noise we know is the sum of all pitches, like how white light is the sum of all colors of light. And nonetheless, noise is something that's kind of very strange and very foreign and very kind of inorganic to us, right? If anything, like the noise sounds that I think of in nature, like what we were talking about earlier, are inorganic things, like the wind blowing or lightning or things like that, crashing sounds and stuff. Whereas tonal content in nature is sort of like bird song or whatever. And so there's this kind of like interesting relationship there between something that's familiar and something that's kind of not familiar. And that's sort of like kind of at least the mode of thinking that was inspiring to this piece, was moving between these kind of extreme, almost existential kind of landscapes in a way. And that the piece, and it's hard to tell from the recording because at the end of the piece, you've had a couple sections where the music just devolves into white noise, this sort of rhythmic, pulsing, frothy noise. And it's electronic noise. It's 1-bit sound that's sort of working just with probabilities, with statistics to generate sound, as opposed to generating a frequency, a pitch. But at the end of the piece, after this has kind of happened a few times, it again devolves into white noise, but then that dissolves away and you're left with the string players playing white noise on their string instruments, which is basically them just dampening the strings to prevent any resonance, and bowing in such a way that just gets this kind of scratchy, hissy sound. And it kind of creates this strange backdrop for these final chords that are kind of floating out in space. Another experience that's a little bit like that Hawaii experience was when my wife and I, on our honeymoon, we went up through northeastern Canada, maritime Canada, and we were in in Newfoundland. I almost said the Netherlands; they're kind of similar mnemonically. But in Newfoundland, there's this area where the mantle, what's it called? If Leslie were here right now, she'd remind me. But where the mantle layer of the Earth's crust has come up above the layer that we're on, and you kind of walk through this landscape and everything's all alive and plants growing and everything, and then you turn a corner around to like a mountain and it's just brown, like dirt and rock, and it looks like you're on Mars suddenly. And I think that's kind of this unnerving feeling that I'm kind of trying to to get to when I'm talking about the music.
I remember that moment at the end. It was just breathtaking. And I remember wanting it to be longer. Like I remember it in the moment of hearing it live, wanting to like hear it again. and so I'm really happy that the piece is recorded now, but I just thought that point of the piece was so stunning, is stunning. But that kind of, it took me a moment after the piece was over, kind of thinking about that moment of sound. That's really incredible. So I encourage all of you listening now to really listen to the whole thing quietly and give yourself space at the end to get through that final section. I was just thinking, maybe if the two of you are up for it, would you like to share the Lucinda Childs dance excerpt, or will you share that at another format?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll play just a moment of it because it was such a meaningful part of this process. I mean, like the Neil Wallace, his role in restaging this piece, and having the vision to do it with this dance by Lucinda Childs, who it was a complete dream come true for me. In the same way that when New Amsterdam and Nonesuch had, decided to release the album, that was just, walking among giants for me. Really meaningful. So maybe just for a moment, I'll play a little bit of this dance of that Neil Wallace and this festival that he's created called Big Idea. He commissioned Lucinda Childs to work with, I forget what the final number is, I think 66 dancers dancing this piece that she created for the full length of of my music, over an hour long, and it was set up this square grid of musicians in the back of this former submarine factory, and in front of them this sort of square with the dance, and it was just well, clearly you know how I feel about it. Let me play just a teeny bit of that for you. I should already have been
and if there's any, I was going to say, just say for everybody watching, if there's any final questions, be sure to put them in the chat while we're putting this video up, because there's a little bit of a lag. We'll just check for final questions when the video is over. And thank you again for joining us. So here's the excerpt from the Lucinda Childs dance.
I'll just stop it there because it goes on and on and on in this brilliance.
Wonderful. Do they have that up for people to watch anywhere, or is it just a private recording that you have?
Good question. I think we don't have a full edit, or I'm not even sure about it. I'll follow up on that and I'll check.
Cool. Well, make sure you're following Tristan Perich and Doug Perkins and New Am on all of the social medias. And to follow up with this, make sure that you get the album and listen to the whole thing and give yourself some quiet and space and support artists directly. And thank you all for listening. We're so grateful for you taking this time in such a hectic, computer-heavy time to join us for this live stream. Any last words or shout outs from the two of you?
I'll shout out again, or thanks to Neil Wallace, thanks to the whole team from Code Arts and the Royal Conservatory in The Hague, and all of our friends from all around the Netherlands and America, and Pat Burns, and Tristan and Leslie, and you, Anne, and everyone from Nonesuch in New Amsterdam. This has been, I think as Tristan said, kind of a dream project that at every level, for myself, I'll say at every level of this happening has been kind of a pinch me moment to believe that, you know, it's so fun to do what we all get to do. We get to do crazy, impossible things. And this was definitely one of those things that, holy cow, it happened. You know, it's also one of those things, like, I think I got a little sad on release day because, like, oh no, it has happened. Oh no, maybe it'll never happen again. But I believe in all of us that even just looking at the two of you on this thing, that we're all going to dream up more crazy fun things to talk about together. But I'm so grateful to the team that helped make this one happen.
Yeah, well, congrats to both of you on a really beautiful album release. And I see Neil saying that they can make the link to the dance recording available. So I'll definitely be looking out for that when that's shared. Thank you both for your wonderful insights to the album, and hope to talk to you and see everybody in person again soon.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.